Well, welcome to Backstage, our Antioch alumni chapter on theater and performance. So we're so glad to have you today for a real treat. Conversation about theater and performance between playwright Terry Baum, Antioch 69, and her longtime friend and fan, Joan Stromanis, 57. I have to talk really fast now because it's their talent and you want to hear from them. But on her website, Terry describes herself as a slightly world-renowned lesbian playwright. Within a few years of graduation from Antioch, she began creating theater on issues including gay rights, medical ethical dilemmas, and the eternal pursuit of love. Critics have compared her to Lily Tomlin, Norman Mailer, B. Arthur, and Woody Allen, but not, she notes, in the same review. Her plays have been published and produced in many countries and languages, and performing her own work, she's toured in a wide variety of countries. Joan Stromanis is a legendary supporter and optimist on behalf of Antioch College in times of its sickness and its health. She's also a faithful member of the Backstage audience. She's been an academic administrator, philosopher, second wave feminist, mathematician, civil libertarian, public speaker, an American pioneer in women's studies. She actually was serving as president of the college when I went to my first meeting joining the Antioch University Board of Trustees. And what a joy she was amid all those guys. We went to a sock hop together actually after one of our meetings because my high school class was having a reunion with the sock hop. Had a great time. Okay, Joan and Terry, take it away.
Terry, we always ask the people who come to Backstage about their Antioch roots and how it influenced the course of their lives. So tell us about what you did at Antioch and what difference it made.
Well, I was a theater major at Antioch. I came to Antioch thinking, even though I loved theater and it was my passion, that it was not a reasonable way to make a living. So besides getting a great training in theater at Antioch, really great, the jobs that I got in social work showed me that the social workers did not care for my personality. And they just simply didn't want, I just had too big a mouth. I never understood that, you were supposed to tug your forelock when you were at the bottom of the hierarchy. And I certainly didn't learn that anywhere at Antioch. And so, and then finally, I took a job at the Studio Arena Theater in Buffalo as a assistant stage manager. And because my boyfriend, who had graduated, was going to graduate school in Buffalo.
Oh, you had a boyfriend?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I didn't come out till I was 30. And I discovered that not only was this the one place that I was always gravitating to, but it was the one place that wanted me to be there. Even if you were the assistant stage manager, you were supposed to be entertaining. So it was crucial to me to go to Antioch. I would say it's the biggest force in shaping my life, other than my parents. Yeah.
Let me ask you, were there any stumbling blocks at Antioch? Did you have any difficulties there, apart from these co-op jobs that didn't appreciate you?
Well, I have to say that, oh God, yes, I wore this dress and I felt I was more fancy dressed than anybody else. And my parents, before we came to the graduation, they were so angry that I had not dressed even more fancy. So but then when we came to the graduation, she saw everybody else, all the other women in jeans. She was okay.
And that's President Dixon, is it?
Yeah. Mhm. So,
So did you have any?
okay, well, I would say, barriers at Antioch. I never got cast till the very last quarter. And I, because I just never was a sweet young thing. Even when I was a sweet young thing, I didn't look like one. So, and I also felt, but of course, I was one of the smart kids in high school. And once I got to Antioch, I felt I was surrounded by people who were students, who were my intellectual superiors. So I was always telling myself, well, at least I'm a nice person.
Well, you've remained that. So let me ask you, you said that you didn't come out until you were 30. So during that time, can you tell us a little bit about that journey? We hadn't discussed that, but I would be very interested to hear, and I think other people would too.
Well, I guess I would say I very gradually got bored with men. And I didn't really, before I came out, I didn't, I started out a very conventional girl who was terribly anxious to be involved with a boy and grateful for the attention. And as it evolved, I just didn't give a damn. I was still sleeping with men, but they had no, I would say I drifted away emotionally from men and got certainly was bored. Yeah, that was the main thing.
So
And
you said you drifted away emotionally. I'm very interested now in asking you where your emotions went. Did they go first to writing or acting? Because you're a playwright and you're an actor, and I assume that you have both identities, right?
well, I don't have that much of an identity as an actor because I almost never got cast in anything. So I was Madame Renevsky in my senior year. That was a very big deal. And Dal directed. That was an amazing production for me. And I learned how to be scintillating, and I've developed a bell-like laugh that I kept for several years. But I didn't really get cast. And so I learned to be a director at Antioch because you had to direct and that was very crucial. You had to direct a one-act play to graduate in theater. And I'm a person who grew up without, I had a loving childhood and all that, but really no encouragement or recognition at any moment in my life until I directed Jack or the Submission by Ionesco, a really wacky absurdist play. And the students, I didn't really hear anything from the teachers, but the students came up to me and said, "You're really good at this." That was the first time I was ever acknowledged by anybody. That's just how happens to be how my life was. I just wasn't what anybody was looking for in terms of, a special until I directed a play. And then it seemed much preferable to be the person choosing actors than to be waiting to be chosen. And I went to Columbia University Graduate School in directing. I didn't stay there long because it was not that great at that time. It really wasn't the same thing they have now. And it wasn't as stimulating as Antioch, and the students were not as smart as the Antiochians. So I just was very frustrated and I quit.
Heard that from so many people. They went to graduate school. It was kind of a letdown.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
you went from being a director to being a playwright at some point. So
Yes. Okay. So that was because I became a feminist.
Okay,
And
something new for you.
yes, absolutely. It was really like I was actually still at Antioch, and I was had a social work job in New York City, and I got into a consciousness raising group. But even I went to a meeting of the New York Radical Feminists. They used to talk about a light bulb going on.
Mhm.
And they talked about the light bulb. And that truly happened to me. I read this one sheet mimeographed thing of feminist statements from the New York Radical Feminists, and the light bulb went on, and I suddenly realized, oh, the problem isn't with me. I'm not the problem. It's
Yep.
society.
Mhm.
It's always been okay that I spoke up too much and had too many ideas.
Right. And so you became a playwright. So
Once you become, this is back in '69, once I became a feminist, there was almost nothing I wanted to direct.
because there weren't plays. I remember that because I was
Yeah,
teaching women's
no,
studies. There weren't films, there weren't plays,
well, there was no nothing.
very
No,
little material.
yeah,
There was of course Julia Reichert's uh um documentary about growing up female, which I used when I was teaching.
yeah,
But
but that, you can't perform a documentary. I needed scripts if I was a director, and there weren't any. So in the beginning, I didn't write myself. We always got together, collaborated, improvised. We would record our improvisations, and I would transcribe them. So I entered writing in a very gradual way. And finally, there was something, an idea that nobody else understood except for me. When we were doing this play on moonlighting and women in work in Lilith. And I had this idea of these women forming a toilet, the parts of a toilet, and one of the workers being afraid to fix the toilet, and the other worker helps her conquer her fear of fixing the toilet. But anyhow, nobody could understand except for me, and that was the first time I wrote something by myself.
and then you ended up writing a whole book of plays.
This is One Dyke's Theater, which was published in 2019. This is not all my plays. This is all my best plays that are lesbian centric. Because I have two plays that are really Jewish centric, and they're not in it. And there's other plays. My play about running for Congress against Nancy Pelosi isn't in it because it's not about being a lesbian. So yeah, I wrote a lot of plays, and I first started doing writing a solo thing, just because I wanted to, just economically, I wanted to make a living. But it was just wonderful. I could travel so easily, and I traveled all over the world as a solo performer. And one of the wonderful things about continuing to perform your own work is you get to keep rewriting it, and it gets better and better.
Right. Whereas if you were working with other people's material, they own it, not you.
Very long. Lilith was 1975. So it was an extremely unusual thing to start a women's theater, a feminist theater, just with women. And I did this because I was at a women's music festival in the Redwoods in Santa Cruz, and some bikers tried to crash it. And I had a vision of a theater. I was on acid. We were all on acid, our little group. I wanted to kill them. I thought, what the hell? There's more of us than them. Let's kill these bikers. But I wasn't in charge of the decision making, so nothing happened. But then I envisioned a play about women's rage against men. So I started Lilith to write theater about women's rage against men, which I didn't do until a couple of years ago. But Lilith Theater was, we toured the Northwest Coast in '77, I think, and it was a very exciting thing to be talking about these issues and doing theater. And we were extremely undogmatic and self-mocking about our presentation.
In those plays, did you act as well as write them?
I was the director,
Okay.
often not writing. When we went on tour, I acted, yes.
Okay, and tell us about your. I understand that your identity now is more as a playwright than as an actor, but you were inspired by other actors, and I want you to tell us that story.
Okay, I told it when, all right. Well, okay, so Eleonora Duse was the first naturalistic actress in the Western European tradition. And she was in the late 19th century, early 20th century. I think she died in 1920. She was actually going to a performance in Pittsburgh, and the theater, she went early and the theater was locked and it was raining and she was locked out and she caught pneumonia and died. But she was an incredible force in theater. She considered it a spiritual medium. She took it as she'd grown up in a commedia troupe in Italy. Actually, in Italy, her first experience in theater was her mother was sick and couldn't, this was in Verona. Her mother was sick and couldn't play Juliet. So Eleonora at 14 had to be Juliet, which is of course Juliet's precise age. And she, during the day, she went out and got a huge bouquet of white roses and tossed these roses down at different places during the performance. I tossed them down to Romeo and when she was on the balcony. And yeah, she knew how to blush on cue. She never wore makeup because she could completely control everything about her body, her autonomous functions.
Blush on cue.
On cue, yes. That was recorded in, this is how I found out about her. I was into Shaw, George Bernard Shaw, and he had all these books of theater criticism before he became a playwright. And he talked about going to her performance twice, and she blushed on cue, the same place. Yeah. They were oh God, I could do the whole thing on Eleonora Duse. She and Sarah Bernhardt were great competitors because Bernhardt was big and the great beauty and very melodramatic, and Duse was considered mousy, and so they were and internal, and so they were always chose to do the same plays in the same city at the same time, so that everybody had to go see both plays to argue about which one was the best. So reading about her totally inspired my acting. I realized there was a deeper level that I could get to. And then I also recently read a biography of Alla Nazimova, who she was actually in Stanislavski's in the theater in Moscow, and then eventually ended up in the movies and kind of lost her soul. But when she was in the theater, she had the same effect on people as Duse, and people thought of her. They called her the successor to Duse. And she toured with the classics like Chekhov and Ibsen to all the cities in the United States, like, in the 20s and 30s. And, there would be sold out crowds in Des Moines, Iowa.
So how did this help you? What did this do for you? These women.
Well, I say Nazimova was a reminder of what Duse had told me. And in fact, I just had a performance where, unfortunately, since it gets more and more difficult to memorize, I hadn't memorized my lines. And this was Hick at the Marsh in the middle of March. And so I had to go, instead of doing the whole show, I had to go there and stand in front of the audience, in front of, behind a music stand and read the play. And I knew I had to be as great as Duse or Nazimova to make people forget that they weren't seeing a full performance.
Ah.
because it was supposed to be a full performance, and I was that great. My
So
most
tell-
political
yeah.
play, what did you say, Joan? What'd you ask?
Tell us how it's your most political play, and it's being performed in Vienna.
Yeah, this is in 1987. And it's about a woman at the bedside of her wife, but this is of course long before gay marriage, and her wife is in a coma, and she cannot get her removed from the ventilator because she has no legal rights to say anything about her wife. So this was a play I wrote in 1983. It was about the political issue of gay marriage, and it was the play was done to raise money and get people more supporters during 3 election campaigns where there were anti-gay rights issues on the ballot. That was in San Francisco, my own town, and also in Pittsburgh and in Billings, Montana. So I was very, very proud that my play had an explicit political use. And
Did it have that use in Europe as well?
no, I mean, not that people had gay rights, gay marriage rights there at that time, but it was not used during a campaign. I was on tour in Germany and Austria.
Ah,
So at that time, it was just a play. So I performed it in Cuba at the Diversity Center, which was the one place where you could talk about being gay in Cuba at the time. And I had the script translated into Spanish. And so people with the English on one side and Spanish on the other, so people could follow along. You know, they do that with operas sometimes.
this is also a political play, but
Yes.
a very different mode of politics. Tell us about Divide the Living Child, which you wrote in Europe.
Yeah, I lived in Amsterdam for 5 years. I moved there because I fell in love with a woman, and I am Jewish, and I was extremely interested in the effect on the Holocaust in Europe. It still seemed to me to have an enormous psychological effect on the Dutch people. And so I wrote this play, Divide, and I started reading obsessively about the Holocaust, and you sort of get to the point of, help, I've fallen into the Holocaust and I can't get up. It went on for 5 years.
I had that. I had that experience when I was teaching a course on the Holocaust,
Yeah, right.
like a whole semester of depression.
I was never depressed. I was fascinated.
Mhm.
But I came to the conclusion that, so I had a play and I took it, it was about the Jewish Council, who was mediating between the Nazis and the Jewish community. And then everybody said, you have to talk to this woman. She was a child of Holocaust survivors, and both of her parents were mentally ill. And she'd done this famous, very abstract play on the Holocaust. So I told her about my play on the Jewish Council, and she said, no, nobody says anything about the Jews until the Christians take responsibility for what they did.
Mhm.
And at that moment, I realized that the Holocaust is a Christian phenomenon. It's not a German phenomenon. It's Christian. The whole Christian world, except South America, was behind it, and couldn't have been done without the compliance of millions and millions of people outside of Germany. So I wrote a play, came up with a play after working for 5 years, came up with a plot in 20 minutes, which was a Jewish woman and her daughter are being hidden by a Christian woman in Amsterdam, and she is the woman, Christian woman, is trying to convert the Jewish daughter to Christianity.
And that's not just a fictional trope, right?
No, actually, yeah. When I was living in Holland, in Amsterdam, and talking to this older couple who were sitting out on the terrace of the cafe as I was, came up that they were Jewish, and I told them about my play, and she said, "Where did you hear that story?" And I said, "I made it up."
I'm thinking about Hick right now. So
Oh, heck. Oh, God. Yeah. Right. You had somebody.
I was involved in that. And
Right.
let's see the next picture.
Yeah. Yeah, Joan was really wanting to, she really tried to help me get a connection in New York City. She had a connection. So this is me as Lorena Hickok. Hick, a Love Story is the story of the lesbian romance between Eleanor Roosevelt and Lorena Hickok, who was the most famous woman reporter of her day. She was assigned to cover Eleanor when the FDR's campaign started in 1932, and they fell in love. And the proof of this relationship is in the 2,336 letters that Eleanor wrote to Hick, that Hick deposited in the National Archives with the proviso that they couldn't be opened until 10 years after she died. So these letters are evidence that this was a real thing that happened. So I sent the script to this friend of Joan's who had contacts who would help produce a off-Broadway play. And she, wrote back and she said she didn't believe in washing people's dirty laundry in public. And Ken Burns couldn't agree more because, he did this whole documentary on the personal lives of FDR and Eleanor, and he talked extensively about FDR's affairs, and but not about Hick. And he was questioned at one point in an interview. He was questioned by a gay man, "Why didn't you talk about what happened with Lorena Hickok?" And Ken Burns actually said FDR's heterosexual affairs were history. The lesbian affair was tabloid material.
Wow.
Yes. So it was not deserving of history, according to Ken Burns.
So are any of the things you do today controversial, or has all controversy been subdued or
Well, I'm writing a play now. This is my latest one. It's Mikveh. This is my play about women's rage. I'm finally writing it. It takes place in a Jewish shtetl in the ritual bathhouse for the women. And it is a very intense affair between Chava, the attendant, who is kind of a golem figure, kind of like, kind of clumsy, and she doesn't read, and anyhow, simple-minded, simple, I would say, not simple-minded. And a beautiful young woman who comes in for the first time. She's being forced to marry a rich man. And she's educated.
What is the mikveh?
The mikveh is a ritual bath that every Jewish community, Orthodox community, has to have. They build the mikveh before they build the synagogue because women have to purify themselves after they've menstruated before they have sex. In Orthodox Judaism, there's no sex, heterosexual sex, once a woman's period has started until, I don't know, it's 10 days or something after she stopped. So the sex is very concentrated during the other part of the month, which happens to be the most fertile time of the month. So So there in this it takes place in Poland.
And
Anyhow,
it's crucial to say that a woman has to use the mikveh, the ritual bath, before her wedding.
yes, that's right. That's why this young girl comes in, because she's going to be married, and before you're married, you have to go to the mikveh. So she has a terrible husband, and anyhow, they end up killing 2 men. One of the men is a beggar who spies them through a knothole in the mikveh. This actually was based on a real account in the New York Times. In one of the Hasidic communities, a rabbi was caught spying through a knothole into the mikveh. Yes, yes. Anyhow, but in mine, I have it's just a beggar, but he's Hava's best friend, and he tries to blackmail them. And Hava flies into a rage when he also tries to rape Rachel, and she kills him, or she throws him over a cliff. Yeah.
This is your story, not mine, but I have to tell you that my grandmother in Poland refused to go to the mikveh before her wedding.
Wow. Wow, that's radical.
And it was quite a story.
I bet.
Another,
I want to hear that. I will definitely want to hear that. So then,
her father took it upon himself. I have to add this.
yes.
You know, at the mikveh, they don't only bathe the woman, they also cut her hair. And in fact, they used to shave her hair.
Wow.
She would wear a wig or a curl.
Yeah.
My grandmother
Title.
refused to have her hair cut and refused to go to the mikveh. And her father announced to the synagogue, to the whole community, that he took it upon himself to forbid her to have her hair cut because she was going to the new world. She was going to another country, and who knew what the customs were there. And he didn't want his daughter to be handicapped by old world ways.
Wow. What a radical dad. That's
And I was
amazing.
named after him.
What, you're named after him? Wow, that's incredible.
Anyway, that's the short version of the story.
Yeah, well, in my play, there's no men like that. So they end up, Hava is the daughter of the witch and is a healer herself. And Rachel's husband is beating her instead of at night. So Hava gives Rachel a sleeping potion, and then Rachel gives her husband a overdose, and he dies. And then they have to flee. So they leave. So in fact, this was controversial because now I'm a Buddhist practitioner. And my teacher said, when I told her that I was working on this play, she said, "Oh, no, no, no. That's not good for your spiritual development to work on something with, violence in it." And I said, and my response was, "And your point is," because I don't care a damn about my spiritual development compared to my work. And then Carolyn, who is a very devout Tibetan Buddhist practitioner, I'm just Zen, which is lightweight compared to Tibetan. Carolyn told me she could not direct the play because of the violence in it. That was contrary to her Buddhist practice.
And that's the only play you've written that has that level of violence in it, right?
Yes. I'm not drawn. Both of these murders happen off stage. I'm like I'd go with the Greeks. On stage violence, anyhow, it's not my strong point. Melodrama and violence on stage are not my strong point as a writer, describing it so it's believable. But the consequences of it emotionally to people who are involved in it, yes, that's what I'm interested in.
So, Terry, considering your career and doing what you do as a lesbian playwright and as a Jewish playwright and as an actor, can you make a living this way?
No, no, no. Mommy and daddy made this possible.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I was wondering about that.
Well, I was supporting myself until I was 40. In,
Mhm.
this very marginal way, being a waitress and typing students' papers and things like that. And what I have observed is at 40 40 is a transitional point where people think, do I really want to be typing students' papers all my life? And so they go back to school or whatever, to get either a degree in theater that they can teach with, or they go into another profession. Many occupational therapists are former theater people, many. But at 40 was when my parents started giving me enough money. It wasn't a lot, so that I didn't have to make a living. So when I got to that point, I was able to not stop doing theater. I spent my whole life doing almost exactly what I want all the time.
Lucky you.
Lucky or spoiled or whatever.
Well,
Yeah.
this is a point when let's invite everybody else into our conversation. This is billed as a question and answer session, but it would be nice to hear reminiscences as well, if they connect with your very interesting life. So let's go back to the I'm going to go to my gallery view, and let's see who has something to ask. And I believe that Barry will be taking care of this session, right?
Yes, I do not see questions in the chat, but a hand did go up. Jacqueline?
I don't have a question for Terry. I just very much enjoyed the Hick reading on the podium. I didn't notice the podium or you turning pages. I just thought I was just enraptured. I thought it was fabulous. I was in history. I was right there. And I am better because I saw it. So thank you so much for
Wow. Thank you, Jacqueline. Yeah, it's really interesting. I noticed several people simply did not see the podium at all. They have no memory of me.
It's a
reading.
fabulous play, and I give you credit as the playwright, but also I give a lot of credit to Eleanor Roosevelt, who wrote the play in effect. It's her.
Yes, her letters. I mean, look, Eleanor Roosevelt was different from everybody else. She was an extraordinary person. Her love letters are also extraordinary. They are. But the whole story is amazing and complicated, and it's
And
an
unknown.
incredible.
And unknown.
Yeah.
I think the biggest one for me was when they're getting off the train in that misty gray. What is
yes.
the line, Terry?
Yes, that silver morning, silver pearl morning.
Silver Pearl Morning.
Yeah. Well, I have to confess, that was not written by me. Pat Bond, who was my very close friend, wrote the first play about Hick quite a long time before me. And she had died and a lot of more material had come out. And so I used I had the permission to use part of her play. So yes, Silver Pearl Morning is hers. Isn't it one? Yes.
A wonderful line.
Yes, it is. I went from that one meeting. I only went to one meeting of the New York Radical Feminists, had this huge light bulb, and then they invited on their guest speaker, who was Bella Abzug, who was running for Congress. And I never went back to the New York Radical Feminists, but I volunteered for Bella, and I became her personal aide and went everywhere with her on that first campaign.
But this is a good time to remind you that you too ran for Congress.
Yes.
Met Nancy Pelosi of all people. And I have a button. I don't know if you can spotlight me enough to.
Yeah, I think right up close to the screen. Yeah.
You spotlight me so that.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah,
This is Terry's campaign button when she ran for Congress against Nancy Pelosi. Why?
Because Pelosi supported the invasion of Iraq and the Patriot Act. And I felt she wasn't representing, I could not bear it because she wasn't representing San Francisco. Here, we were all going out and demonstrating, and our political representative couldn't have cared less. And nobody wanted to hear about it. Truly, nobody wanted to hear anything bad about Nancy Pelosi. And then when you get up to that level of power, you don't have to twist any arms. Like, I was kept off the ballot because I was a write-in, and I didn't, I didn't get, even though I got the amount of write-ins, this is for the primary, even though I was a Green, even though I got the amount of write-ins that was needed, which was almost impossible, some of the people who wrote my name in didn't connect the arrow next to my name. And the Department of Elections said they would not count the votes.
This is the arrow on the ballot.
The arrow on the ballot, there's a gap in the ballot, and you black out the gap to vote. So people had written out my name in, some of them, and not blacked out the gap. And the head of the elections actually said in a hearing that just because they wrote my name in didn't mean they actually wanted to vote for me. So then I took it to court, and, well, admittedly, I had a lawyer who was having a nervous breakdown, so it wasn't the greatest. We didn't have the greatest defense. But the truth is any superior court judge going to make a decision that might displease Nancy Pelosi? Nancy Pelosi doesn't have to say anything to any superior court judge who would prefer to be a higher judge if he could. He's not gonna, trespass on her territory. So it was terrible. And I lost two of my friends, closest friends, because they could not accept that I was running against Pelosi.
We have a question from Sarah Albertson. Sarah, can you unmute yourself?
Sarah and I were at Antioch together, and we're very good friends.
Yes. Hi, Terry.
Hi,
This has just
Sarah.
been so fun and interesting, fascinating to catch up about your life. But I had a question that, if you can recall, I don't know if you have opinions about it, but we were Vista volunteers.
Yes.
We're in a theater troupe, and we went to Appalachia
Yes.
one summer, and I just wondered what value did you think that had, or what impression?
I think we were the folk theater of the Appalachians. And this was the concept of Paul, do you remember his last name?
Chipman.
He was like the king of the drama department. He got all the best roles. And he was quite compelling. And so he had this concept of the folk theater of the Appalachians, and we were part of the Appalachian Volunteers. And I think the theater that we did with the people there was very empowering. However, it was clear to me that that wasn't what I wanted to do with my life. That became clear when we did the folk theater of the Appalachians. I wanted to do theater with other people who were totally committed to theater. But I think what we did, the improvisations, and we built up things to take to demonstrations and stuff like that. I thought that was very important work. That was
Great. That's nice to hear.
that's how I felt about it. Sarah and I were continually being evicted because they thought we had men coming up to our room. We never were. But they thought it. So we were always having to leave. We were in the white community. Finally, we ended up in the Black community. We were in a house with other Black people, they were African American, and we didn't have to worry about The idea that we
Interesting.
were sneaking people.
We
into-
have a question from Meryl. Meryl, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, I'm unmuted here and I'm keeping the camera off because I'm getting better reception. But I first became acquainted with Terry's work through the magnificent Hick. And then I read her plays and loved them. But then I saw a video of Divide the Living Child, and I have got to say that it tore my heart out. I watched it several times, and it is just one of, as a Jewish woman, as a Jewish lesbian, it's one of the most magnificent pieces of work that I personally have seen.
Thank you. Yes, I happen to have, if you go to my website, liliththeater.com, LilithTheater, maybe somebody could put it in the chat. You go to the videos, you can watch it. Just the Divide the Living Child, we did it during the pandemic, so it's on Zoom. And I had the suspicion that this play might work well on Zoom because all the characters are really trapped, you know? And by the Nazi invasion, you know, the Nazi occupation. And it did, and we had one of those magic theater times when everything fell together. Everyone was amazing. And the mother and daughter were completely believable as a mother and daughter. It was one of those experiences. They don't happen all the time. A lot of good theater happens that isn't that like that. I keep on writing Divide the Living Child. I started when I was living in Holland, which I left in '94. But I wrote it quite a bit since then too.
So when was it produced on Zoom during the pandemic?
Right, like the first version that was actually had a real live production. There was the threat was a Nazi who came to inspect the house. So the mother had to hide. The daughter had a Christian identity in the world. And then again, as I said, I'm not good with melodrama. Didn't work for me. So I got rid of the Nazi soldier and I had a nosy neighbor who suspects that Hannah is not a real Christian and who's always coming over and visiting and trying to trip her up with questions, which is actually so much more interesting than a Nazi soldier. So yeah, I'm very, very proud of that. I really wish I had a not true production of what I have now. Sadly, most Jewish theaters will not take plays about the Holocaust. They will not take submissions of plays about the Holocaust. They just won't. So you can't even get it read.
Interesting.
So I don't even know how to make it happen. And even when I had enough money, you know, so that I didn't have to work other than in theater, I did not have enough money to produce this play.
You could send it to my friend who rejected Hick because it's not about lesbians.
Well, what the hell?
We have a question here from David Vincent. How did you arrange the many venues to perform in the US, Mexico, and Europe?
Carolyn arranged that tour. I didn't arrange it. She wanted to go to Mexico, damn it, because her daughter was living there. And so that's why we went. But it was absolutely wonderful. I mean, performing was great, and Mexico is just incredible. It's a little bit of a word of mouth thing, you know, somebody who saw the play, thought it was great, and they know somebody who knows somebody. A lot of phone calls to all these connections, you know, before we had the internet. Phoning. And one time I planned a whole tour. I decided I was going to have a different persona because it was so hard to sell myself. So I said I was my business manager, Andrea Vortex. That was my nom de business. But I did contact this. I wanted to do immediate family, and my friend close friend had somebody who was a teacher at a nursing school. It was perfect for them. And so I talked to him twice. And then one time he called me back. I talked to him as Andrea Vortex, and he called me back, and I didn't know who to be. So
Oh,
he contacted my friend Marty, and he said, there's something fishy going on here. And then I wrote him what I thought was a wonderful, gallant letter, funny letter, explaining what I was doing, but I never heard from him again, so I lost that booking. Or I could say Andrea Vortex lost the booking. I noticed long before Trump, things kept getting more and more absurd, you know? But I think it's a rottenness that has been in our country forever, you know, that is now the pressure of facing our past sends our terrible, violent past sends a lot of people zooming to the right. You know, they don't want to. I think people freak themselves out by electing Obama, because certainly a lot of people who voted for Obama then voted for Trump. And so it's all the stuff we haven't dealt with forever, really, you know, and we still have this concept of our country is somehow exceptional and noble.
My take is this. It's true that the country is divided, and it's divided by some measures 50-50. And the bad news is that half the country is willing to put up with retrograde ideas, reactionary ideas, undemocratic ideas. But the good news is that half the country opposes that. And I really find myself focusing on the good news that half the country will resist that.
well, you're the optimist that Paula suggested you were.
Well,
I'm sorry.
Okay, I just want to say, I don't think we have any option other than hope, because if you give up, that's exactly what the other side wants. And also, we have a responsibility to the whole world. We're still the most influential country in the whole world, and we have a responsibility, and we have to hope, and we have to keep working. That's all.
Yes.
I totally agree with you, Paula, that there isn't any other option, honorable option.
Wonderful.
Thank you. This was so much fun.
Terry and Joan, you were just wonderful. And Terry,
magnificent.
Great story. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Bravo.
Thank you, Terry.
And it's been so much fun, all of us together in the same room, and then all of a sudden it's gonna poof, go away and you'll feel totally abandoned.
Thank you, Meryl.